Me too. Okay.
Okay, hi everybody. This is take two, just so you know. Welcome to week 4, lesson 4, I mean, for the Come Follow Me. This is John chapter 1. So we've done Matthew and Luke for the last couple of weeks, so now we're starting with John. We haven't done anything with Mark yet. He's still yet to come. So we want to first talk a little bit about who John was and as a person, as a writer, what was his intention. So John was actually one of John the Baptist's disciples first, and then John the Baptist will introduce John to Jesus. John's occupation was a fisherman. His brother was James the Lesser. If you need some help on that, go to the Bible dictionary with all the Jameses to get them figured out. I have to do that once every 6 months. And he was called the Sons of Thunder with his brother. We'll get into that a little bit. In his writings, he always refers to himself in the book of John as the one Jesus loves. Don't you?
Yeah.
I love that. It's just like, he never calls himself by name. Mm-hmm. He always just says, oh, and then the one Jesus loves, he did this. And he's always talking about himself. So he's John the Beloved. He wrote 5 books of the New Testament. Revelation was written by John.
He didn't die. We should point that out.
So he's still on the earth. He's transfigured. Translated, I mean.
Yes.
He's trans something. And he's on the earth. And he's... anything else about him?
His object was to show Jesus as the Son of God.
Right. So these other, and you'll see that right at the very beginning of John's writings, that the other stories start off with, here's the genealogy, here's Jesus' baby, and John's going to start off like strong. He is writing to members of the faith. He's writing to disciples, so he's going to write a little bit deeper and to just show he is God's almighty Son.
Yeah. We love that the first 18 verses of John just start out with his witness or his testimony of who Jesus is. He wants to tell us he's the Word, that the Word was with God. He wants to tell us that through him all things were made that were made. In him was life. He talks to us about how he was the light. So one thing you may want to do at the very beginning is just go through John and pull out every way John describes who Jesus Christ was, what we learn about him. Another thing that would be really awesome in your study is to pull out the Living Christ document and lay that side by side, these 18 verses, and see where they complement each other and what you learn from modern day witnesses of who Jesus Christ is.
Yeah, use the JST because there's some changes there, which would be helpful, nice if you want. Or the other one is great too. And so just you could just list. We put a little box on the study sheet, but you might want to open up your journal for this one because there's a lot that you could.
Yeah, it'll be so good.
You could learn and see. Okay, we love John 1 because of the story. This is like people, you almost could title the chapter Meeting Jesus. These are like the first time some of these people that you love throughout the Gospels meet Jesus for the first time. And so it's such a fun story. So it starts off about halfway through the chapter about, where is it? Oh, it's 35, 36, right? It starts right there. So John the Baptist is kind of the center character here. And he's been spending time down by the water, preaching, baptizing, and keeps telling people, people are gathering to John. He's got a lot of disciples. A lot of people come listen to him. And a crowd is always gathering. And he just says to them every time they meet, y'all, somebody greater than me is coming. Like, it's not me. It's not about me. He is coming. His sandals, I am not even worthy to buckle up. So just wait because he is coming. And there they are one day down by the river. And John's mid-sermon, preaching, talking. And all of a sudden, over the crest of the hill comes Jesus. And John stops mid-sentence and just says, everybody look. There he is, the Lamb of God. And Jesus comes and everybody looks. And he must say it with so much passion and faith, because the next verse says 2 of the people were like, well, like, who is he? And we want to know. And so they start following Jesus, down the path. And Jesus turns behind himself. I'm not behind, but turns behind and says in verse 38, What seek ye? Or what do you want? Why are you following me? And they said, Master, where dwellest thou? Or where do you live? Which is kind of a funny question.
Well, and where did you come from,
like,
right? Who are you?
Yeah, and maybe with maybe they're starstruck, or maybe the real question they're asking is, why does John like love you so much? What is your story? Jesus' invitation, and this comes up again and again in the chapter in verse 39, is come and see. No answer, just come along. And so they do, and verse 39 says they came and saw and stayed with him that whole day. I don't know what their plans were for the rest of that day, but once they met him, they couldn't leave.
And don't you love that's his invitation for all of us, right?
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't ever just say, this is who I am. His invitation always is, if you want to know who I am, come and experience.
Yeah, for yourself. Just come and see. It's so simple. It's throughout the whole thing. Anyways, next day they couldn't stand it. One of those two was named Andrew. He'll become one of Jesus' 12 disciples. And Andrew's brother is Simon, who you know and we know as Peter. And he runs to him the next day and just finds him, and he says, we found the Messiah. This is 41. You have to. And 42. And he brought him to Jesus. Like Simon, I don't know if he had like fishing plans that day, and he's like, I'm sorry, you can't. But don't you love that? Of he just like, sorry, just grabs him. You just have to come. Come and see, right? He's like, you have to come and see him. And so Peter comes and has this interaction, with Jesus. This is where he'll get his name, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Next day, Philip finds Jesus, probably because Andrew and Peter, because they were from all the same city. You learn in 44. So Peter probably goes and gets Philip and says, Philip, oh my gosh, you have to come and find him. And so he does. And then Philip, verse 45, goes and finds his friend Nathaniel. Don't you love how it's just like when somebody, it's like when you see a really good movie or something and you have to like
tell everybody. I love what it's like. And he first found his brother, right? It's going in order. Obviously there were other people he brought along as well, but everybody is just going to share the good news, right? Yeah. Look what we found.
Jesus went viral before it was even a thing. That is, so they go and he finds his friend Nathaniel and he says, Nathaniel, we found him. This is verse 45. Of whom the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Now, Nathaniel's response is classic of the time. We know what the name Jesus means, and it's a tender feeling, for us. But Jesus was a really common name back then. It would be like Jim or something. And he said he's from Nazareth, which was the sticks, y'all. No road went through Nazareth. Nobody was from Nazareth. No one goes on vacation to Nazareth. It's population 40. And so he's from this tiny, tiny town. I don't even know if we have an equivalent here, but just think of the smallest town you can think of, -3. And that's what Nazareth is. And so he says, we found him. The one the whole Old Testament's about. Jim from Mona. Okay, or whatever. Sorry for Mona. But it's like tiny little town. And Nathaniel's response at 46, where was I? 46. He's like, does any good thing come out of Nazareth? There's no way. There's no way the one Moses writes about
came from Nazareth.
Yeah, it's impossible. It's impossible. And Philip's response is classic because he says, I get it. This is a story that really is too good to be true. And I served as a bishop for a couple of years, and sometimes people will come in and they want to ask questions and they want to talk about things, and sometimes some of the questions people ask you, like, you just got to look into it a little bit more, or you haven't seen this. But the one question that people ask that I'm like, you're right, is when they say, this is a story that's too good to be true. I'm like, you're right. It really is too good to be true. And so the response to that is, come and see. That same response. Come find out for yourself. I get it. You have your questions. You have your doubts. Just come and experience it.
Because he doesn't even have words to describe, right? I remember several years ago we lived in Draper, and it was August. And it was this crazy August afternoon. You could see the storm clouds coming in, and they were just black. And the sky was even just a little green. So you were like, something big is coming. And I got all my kids. We do, but it wasn't. I got all my kids in the house. down, and we were downstairs, and the wind started to blow, and it was blowing so hard people's trampolines were flying through our backyard. And my neighbor had this glass picnic table, and we just watched it lift up off of her back porch, and then it hit the fence in between our house and shattered all over my backyard in little pieces. No one could go out barefoot in our backyard for like years after it happened. The storm was like devastating, and my kids were just holding on to me. Josh and Caleb, they were just holding on for dear life. And when it was all over and it had all quieted down, we walked upstairs, and I opened the door to look what the damage had been in the front yard. And there was the most unbelievable rainbow you've ever seen in your life. Double, you could see both of them clearly. It was like right on top of our neighborhood, and it was like breathtaking. And I'll never forget Josh, who was probably 4 at the time. He was so overwhelmed by the beauty of it that he took off running across the street and started knocking on the doors of all of our neighbors. And he was just yelling in that little 4-year-old voice, "Come and see, come and see." He couldn't even describe what was happening, but out of the midst of all of this dark and terrible storm was this thing that he wanted everyone to know about, but he didn't want to tell them. He wanted them to come and see for themselves. And so everybody, all of our neighbors came and stood in my front yard. And we all just stood there looking up at this rainbow. And every time I read this story, I just think sometimes what you know about Jesus is so good, you don't even have words to be able to describe. You just have to say, you know what, you come here, and you can see for yourself what's going on.
Yeah, that's so awesome. That same response we got from the shepherds last week, where they're like, I just have to knock on everyone's door.
Yes.
So I thought when you said that, I was like, I just have to. This is just come and see, and it just speaks for itself. It's a message that speaks for itself.
So you keep telling about
it gets better. Come and see. So Nathanael starts going. This is verse 47. Jesus sees Nathanael coming. They have not been introduced yet. And he says, "Behold, an Israelite in whom there is no guile." We'll come back to that in just a second. But that is like, this man has a heart of gold. And Nathanael hears it. And he says in 48, "Whence knowest thou me?" He's like, "Do you know me? Have we met? Why would you?" And it's such a great compliment. Like if we had never met and I saw you and I was like, "Hey, nice shirt," or something, you'd be like, "Thanks. Wow, that's really nice." But to compliment someone's heart and soul day one, he's like, "Whoa." And then Jesus answered and says this, "Before Philip called thee, before he went and got you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." And Nathanael answers back says...
Let's say this first. If you've ever been to Israel, do you know how many fig trees there are?
Yeah, there's so many.
They're everywhere. Also, it's really hot in Israel. And so the odds that someone is going to be sitting under a fig tree
is 100%.
Yeah, everyone's sitting under fig trees. And so there's something that is a little bit weird about these verses, because you feel like a lot of people are probably sitting under fig trees. But Nathanael's response is so unique of how he responds back.
Yeah, look what he says. "Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel." Bows down in worship, gushes. And you're like, listen, the normal response to "I saw you under the fig tree" is, okay, awesome. But Nathanael gives a response that's not typical. This is like kind of over the top. For "I saw you under the fig tree, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel."
You had to just start thinking to yourself, something significant must have happened under the fig tree. We don't know what it is, but probably it was something that only Nathanael and God knew about. It was just that moment. If you were to ask yourself, is there a moment that you look back in your life that only you and the Lord know about? What is that moment? We love to think about this when we teach this story, is what is your fig tree moment? What's the moment only you and the Lord know about that just solidified your testimony of him, that you just know? Maybe it was a tender mercy. Maybe it was a miracle your family experienced. Maybe it was an answer to a prayer, but some moment that was just touched your heart. It was significant to you that happened that let you know Jesus is the Christ, that he's the Son of God. What is that moment?
And that he knows who I am.
Yes. Intimately.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like something happened there that only God and Nathanael would have known. And that's what he was kind of cluing into him. And he's like, wow. He
knows me.
Right.
He really does know my heart. Yeah. Right?
So this it's just so fun. This chapter is so fun of just all these, like the come and see, going, getting friends, and everybody meeting him.
And you love the
for
response
first time.
from Jesus to Nathanael at the very end. We
Oh
can't
yeah.
miss that.
Oh yeah.
It's
Okay, this
so
is the
good.
best thing. He says in 50, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, believest thou? He was like, that's what you already
That's all it
believe?
takes.
That's it? And then he says this, thou shalt see greater things than these. Right? Or in other words, buckle up, Nathaniel. You ain't seen nothing yet, buddy. But he's like, you are beginning. You thought that was good? You are
Wait
beginning.
till you see.
This is chapter 1, man. This is chapter 1. Just wait to see what is going to happen. And tells him in 51, if you read this, you might be like, what's he saying? He says, verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. That's a story about Jacob in the Old Testament and Jacob's ladder and seeing the vision of heaven and angels. And that's a story Nathaniel would have grown up on as a kid. It was a bedtime story to him, the miracles of the Old Testament. So Jesus is talking about one and just saying, like, you know, all those stories from the Old Testament, they're about to happen in your life. You will see angels, you will see glory, you will see things you never imagined.
And that's what happens when you choose to come and see, right? When you choose to have personal experiences with Jesus Christ, you're going to experience greater things than you could ever imagine would happen in your life. That's just what happens when you have personal encounters with the Lord.
Right. Lehi's got the same promise when he says, eat this fruit. It's better than anything you've ever tasted. He can't even describe it, right? He's like, you just have to try it. You just have to come and see.
One of the things that is so fun in this chapter is to hear how they introduce who Jesus is to each other, right? There's all different names of Christ, like we were looking at in lesson 2. There's so many names of Christ here that you may want to go through and just highlight both in verses 1 through 18, but also as each of these men are
they're all
Jesus.
looking for him as someone else. They all relate to him in a different way. John starts off by saying it's the Lamb of God. That's how he sees him, identifies the King of Israel. Nathaniel says the Son of God, Messiah, which means Christ. Right? They're all looking for him under these different names.
Yep. And if you're going to keep track of that in your scriptures, just highlighting all those names of Christ, all of the references you need are on the paper, so you'll be able to go through and just highlight those. But there's a really interesting thing that happens in here. Not only do we recognize names of Christ, but we learn something about the Lord here that is unique and also fun to watch for, and that he names the people who he's working with, right? He gives them nicknames. Often a nickname is something that endears you to someone.
Yeah.
And that he does that. He starts going through and telling these men something about them, and even a name that he's going to call them to remind them what he sees in them, which is so powerful to me. We're just going to go through and name some, but Simon right there in verse 42, when he says, and when Jesus beheld him, he said, thou art Simon, the son of Jonas, thou shalt be called Cephas, which by interpretation is a stone. And it's not just any stone. That translation of that word would actually be the type of stone that would be a seer stone. So it lets you know that what Jesus already saw in Peter right when he met Peter. He just saw that he was going to become this remarkable man that Peter couldn't have had any idea in that moment. But the name Jesus gives him is this name of who he will become.
Yeah, and Cephas is also translated Petra, rock, or Peter, and that's why we call him Peter. It's actually his nickname. His real given name was Simon. But we call him his nickname. Like, that's how he's known, which is awesome.
Yeah,
because
so awesome.
That's what Jesus saw. Don't you love it? He was like son of Jonah. Like, he walks up to him and he's just like, hey, you're Jonah's boy. He's like, I'm going to call you the rock.
And all of that is in the footnotes. So if you want to be highlighting that in your scriptures, that's where it will give you some of those.
Yeah. So Nathaniel, you remember we said this, you just mentioned it while we were telling the story, that he comes up to when he sees him and he says, there is a man in whom there's no guile, which means you've got such an honest, golden heart. It's so pure. Like, no guile means your intentions are always good. An Israelite indeed, he says. And Israel, remember, was God's chosen covenant people. And so he's an Israelite indeed is a way to just say, you are just faithful to the core. That's what he calls Nathaniel. Nathaniel's surprised by it, but Jesus is teaching him what he sees in him and what he can become.
Oh, and I just love that part. And James and John, we love, he calls them the sons of thunder. Don't you want to meet them? Like, what qualifies you for that kind of a name? The sons of thunder. It is so good.
Yeah, and that reference is on there. We find that in the book of Mark, but we just wanted to throw it in into the spot.
It's so good.
Right here.
And as we thought about this, as we were going through, we thought to ourselves, what would Jesus say about you? What name would he give you? Have you ever thought about that? Like, who would he describe you as and what you could accomplish in your life? And this year at Christmas, every year, Greg and I give our kids a meaningful gift, and we just spend time thinking about it. And all of our boys are at the point where they or have entered into their professions, what they're going to do, and they're starting to have an office desk or have a place where they work. For Garrett, it's obviously a locker, but everybody has their spot where they work. And I thought I would love to just give them a reminder of what I see in them and the good qualities they have that they bring. And as I was trying to think about it and think what I could give them, they could just sit on their desk, and praying a little bit about what I wanted to write about them, I just had this prompting, really, you should find something that represents what God sees in them. And I thought to myself, well, how would I know, like, what God sees? I mean, I can imagine, but I don't know. And then the prompting came again, look in their patriarchal blessings. And a patriarchal blessing, for those of you who don't know, is just a blessing that you are given once in your lifetime. And it is a blessing from heaven, from God, that describes who you are and what you have the potential to become. And it's 1 or 2 pages usually. And so I pulled out these sacred blessings of each of my kids and started going through, and I had never noticed before, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, how many qualities are actually contained in a patriarchal blessing, and descriptive words of who my boys were. And as I started writing down these words, I thought to myself, wow, I have some really powerful kids in my home that I hadn't realized that power that they had. And I got all their words listed out. And as I was listing out the words, I was looking for statues they could put on their desk. And I stumbled upon these awesome statues just on Amazon that I found. And I bought a different one for each of my kids. Just what I thought, if God were to look at them, maybe what he would see in them, who they were. This is my son Caleb's, who is in medical school right now. And this is a saint that represents healing. Everything about him, his staffs, everything has to do with just healing people. And I thought, I would love Caleb to look at this every day and just see that maybe this is who God sees in him, this powerful saint who is capable of bringing healing. And for each of my boys, the statue is different, but powerful for each of them. And I took time to take each of those words from their blessings and just write them, so that they would be able to see and remember, this is what God sees in me. This is who I could become in my life with him. And maybe that's something you want to do in your families. We love the scripture that is in John 1:12. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe. And we just feel strongly that the Lord really will give each of us the power to become the sons and daughters of God through him, through his atoning sacrifice, through what he is able to do for us through grace to enable us to become exactly who he knows we can become, just like he did for Peter, just like he did for each of these men. The same is true for us. And maybe you do want to sit down and, for your younger kids, just write down, these are the heaven-sent qualities that I see in you. David was saying it might be fun to write a letter to them and just put it in an envelope, and at the end of this lesson, hand to each of them, this is what I think God would see in you. If you have older kids and they've received their patriarchal blessing, then you might want to take a minute to go through and type those up, or let them go through.
Yeah, have them search it
and
see,
find the qualities and the good things that God sees in them.
And you know what? It just it will be an experience where sometimes it's hard for someone to believe that about themselves. Mm. And I think it's important to point out and use the scripture to say, it's not about what you can do through like grit and goal setting, but it's about what God can do. This is a testament about that God can take someone so ordinary, so plain, and turn them into something.
Yeah.
This is centered on it's a lot more about who he is
than who
we are. Because what can he make us? He's got the power to turn this. I mean, what did Peter think when he walks up and he's just like, I see in you strength and seership and power is what I see. And he's just like, I haven't even taken a shower after fishing, And it's like, it's not about Peter. Yeah. It's about, this is how magnificent God is, that he can take ordinary people.
Yep. So good. This chapter is so
it's
good.
One of our favorites.
There are so many things you're going to be able to do with this.
It's just a really fun one.
And let's make a mention again here. We really are wanting to know what you are doing in your homes. And so on Facebook or even on our Instagram, if you want to be posting what was your favorite part of your lesson from last week, so that we can just be learning from each other and keeping up with each other would be so awesome.
Yeah, and we're going to try and put those in the newsletter, just little tips from each other that we're finding, because we don't have the best ideas in the world. We're just kind of sharing, this is what, what we like. So thanks for
And if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, sign up. It's at emilybellfreeman.com. And it'll come every Monday, all the tips you need.
Yeah, or you can find those links in our bios on Instagram too.
Yeah.
So,
all right, have a good week. Good luck.